In a world of cold technology and hard surfaces, the human heart remains the only thing that is truly real. Experience the collision of digital art and raw emotion in our unique storytelling experience. Subscribe now and feel the beat of a heart that refuses to break.
Na, I suju dung. Narrator equals Roy. O nung hai. Con try equals Kevin. Chai equals Kevin. Chai equals Kevin. Chai equals Nadine. Fing try equals Nadina. Fing fo fung puch. Fing's try equals Dantine. Pung tra. Epug tung dun sasha. The call went to voicemail again. I stood in my kitchen with the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to my son's recorded voice ask me to leave a message. I had already left 3. I set the phone down on the counter and told myself it was nothing. Kevin was 36 years old. He didn't need his father checking in every few days like he was still in high school. But here's the thing about being a father. You never really stop being one. Doesn't matter how old they get. The worry doesn't retire. I went back to my coffee and tried to read the newspaper. I made it through maybe half a page before I picked up the phone again. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I always called Kevin on Tuesdays. That was our thing. His mother started it back when he first moved out for college, and after she passed, we just kept doing it. Every Tuesday, 7 in the evening. He'd pick up on the second ring and say, "Hey, Dad," and we'd talk for 20-30 minutes about nothing important. His work at the warehouse, what I'd been growing in the garden, whatever game was on that weekend. He hadn't answered last Tuesday either. I'd told myself he was busy, maybe working a double shift. He'd done that before. Gone quiet for a week, then called me on a Sunday full of apologies and explanations. It happened. He was a grown man with a life, but 2 Tuesdays in a row was different. I called his cell again. Voicemail. I called his landline. He was one of the last people under 40 I knew who still had one. It rang 11 times before I gave up. That night, I sat in the living room with the television on and didn't watch a single second of it. My mind kept drifting back to Kevin, to the last time we'd actually spoken. It had been a good conversation. He'd seemed tired, maybe a little distracted, but nothing alarming. He asked how my knee was holding up. I asked if Caleb was excited about starting 2nd grade. He laughed and said the kid talked about nothing else. Caleb, my grandson. 7 years old, and convinced he was going to be either a firefighter or a dinosaur paleontologist, depending on the day. I fell asleep in the chair thinking about that laugh. Wednesday morning, I called Kevin's workplace. I felt a little foolish doing it, like I was the kind of parent who checked up on their adult children at the office. But the feeling didn't stop me. The woman who answered was polite. She put me on hold for a few minutes, then came back and told me Kevin hadn't been in since Friday. Since Friday. It was Wednesday. That was nearly 5 days. She assumed he'd called in sick, she said. There'd been some confusion. She didn't elaborate, and I didn't push her. I thanked her and hung up. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that. Kevin would never just stop showing up to work without calling. He'd had that job for 4 years. He cared about it. He cared about the routine, about being reliable. That was the word his mother always used for him. Reliable. Even as a kid, if he said he'd be somewhere at 3 o'clock, he was there at 2:45. Something was wrong. I called the non-emergency police line and asked about a wellness check. The officer I spoke to was patient, walked me through the process. She said they could send someone out, but given that Kevin was an adult and there were no signs of an immediate emergency, it might take some time. I gave her Kevin's address. She said they'd try to get to it by end of day. I waited. Nobody called me back. I tried the police line again Thursday morning. The officer I spoke to this time looked up the request and told me an officer had gone by the house Wednesday evening, knocked on the door, and gotten no answer. No signs of disturbance. No broken windows. No cause for concern. No cause for concern. I hung up the phone and put on my coat. I'd been telling myself to wait, to be reasonable, to not overreact. I was done being reasonable. My son hadn't shown up to work in 5 days, hadn't returned any of my calls, and an officer knocking on the door once at 6 in the evening and getting no answer was apparently the end of the investigation. I was 63 years old with a bad knee and a 4-hour drive ahead of me, and I did not care about any of that. I filled up a thermos of coffee, left a note for my neighbor to check on the dog, and got in the truck. Kevin lived in a small house in a quiet neighborhood on the east side of the city. He'd bought it 3 years ago when things with Nadine seemed stable. When he was still trying to make it work for Caleb's sake, I think. The house had a red door and a big oak tree in the front yard that Caleb liked to climb. I'd helped Kevin paint that door the summer after he moved in. I pulled into the driveway a little after noon. The house looked normal. That was the first thing I noticed. Lights off, curtains drawn, but that wasn't unusual for midday. Kevin's truck was parked along the curb. That caught my attention. If he'd gone somewhere, why was his truck still here? I knocked on the front door. Nothing. I knocked again, harder. Kevin? It's Dad. I'm going to keep knocking until you open this door, son. Silence. I tried the door. Locked. I went around the side of the house. Through the gate he never bothered to latch. Into the backyard. The back door was locked too, but there was a window next to it that Kevin had always kept cranked open just a crack because the kitchen ran hot. I'd told him 100 times that was a security issue. He'd wave me off every time. Today I was grateful. I worked the window open, reached in, and unlocked the door. The house was dim and close, the air stale in the way of rooms that haven't been opened in a while. I called Kevin's name and got no answer. The kitchen was mostly clean. A coffee mug on the counter with a ring of dried coffee at the bottom. A cereal bowl in the sink. I walked through to the living room. Nothing obviously wrong. Some toys on the floor. A blanket bundled on the couch. A half-finished coloring book on the coffee table. Dinosaurs, I noticed. Caleb's. I climbed the stairs. Kevin's bedroom door was open. The bed was made. His phone was on the nightstand, plugged in and dark. That hit me harder than almost anything else. His phone was here. Wherever he'd gone without his phone. I stood in the hallway for a moment, not sure where to look next, and that's when I heard it. A sound, small and muffled, from down the hall. From the direction of Caleb's room, I moved toward it. Caleb's room had a closet with a folding door. The kind that sticks when the humidity gets high. The sound was coming from inside it. A rustling, like something shifting its weight. And then, so quiet I almost missed it, a small voice. Hello? I dropped to my knees in front of that door. Caleb? Buddy, is that you? A pause. Then Grandpa? I pulled the door open. He was curled in the back corner of the closet, wedged between a bin of Legos and a stack of board games. He had a flashlight, one of those little keychain ones, and it had almost certainly been dead for at least a day because the beam was barely aglow. He was wearing the same clothes I'd last seen him in at Easter. He was holding a small plastic triceratops in one fist. He looked at me with eyes that were too old for a 7-year-old's face. I knew you'd come, he said. I don't have the words for what happened in my chest in that moment. I don't think the words exist. I reached in and pulled him out and held him against me, and he didn't cry. He just held on, this small boy, held on like he was making sure I was real. You okay? I managed. Are you hurt? He shook his head against my shoulder. Are you hungry? A nod. I carried him downstairs to the kitchen and made him a peanut butter sandwich, the only thing I could find enough of. And while he ate, I sat across from him and tried to keep my voice calm and even, and asked him to tell me what happened. He told me the way children tell things. Not in order, not with context, jumping around in time and back again. But eventually, I pieced it together. His mother, Nadine, had brought a man to the house. A man named Troy. Caleb had seen him before, a few times. He didn't like Troy. Caleb had seen him before, a few times. He didn't like Troy. He said Troy had angry eyes. There had been a fight. A big one, at night. After Caleb had gone to bed. He'd heard shouting through the wall. His father's voice, and then another voice, and then his mother's. He'd hidden under his blankets with his flashlight and his triceratops. And then it got quiet. His mother came into his room in the dark. She told him to go into the closet. She said it like she was angry, not scared. She said she'd be back soon and he needed to stay quiet and not come out and not make any noise. She put a box of crackers and 2 juice boxes inside with him. She didn't come back. He didn't know how many days it had been. His flashlight had died. He'd eaten all the crackers. He'd been too scared to come out. I called 911. I gave them Kevin's address. I told them I'd found a child who had been locked in a closet, that the child's father was missing, and that I needed someone there now. The dispatcher kept me on the line. I kept one arm around Caleb and talked to the dispatcher and stared at the back door and tried to stay steady. The police were there in 8 minutes. They came in, assessed Caleb, called for an EMT unit. A young officer, she couldn't have been more than 25, crouched down in front of Caleb and showed him her badge and told him he'd done a very brave thing. He looked at her seriously and asked if his dad was coming home. She looked at me over his head. I looked back at her. Neither of us said anything. It took them 2 days to find Kevin. They found him in a storage unit on the edge of town, unit number 14, rented 6 weeks earlier in the name of a woman who didn't exist. A fake ID that later traced back to Nadine. He had been wrapped in a tarp and left there like something disposable. I can't write about that part in much detail. Some things a father shouldn't have to know about his son's last hours. The detectives told me what I needed to know, and I thanked them, and I sat in the parking lot of the police station afterward for a long time before I could drive. What the investigation uncovered, piece by piece over the following weeks, was this. Kevin had a life insurance policy. $250,000. He'd taken it out when Caleb was born, the way a lot of young fathers do, wanting to make sure his kid would be okay if something happened to him. Nadine was still listed as the primary beneficiary. They hadn't updated the paperwork after the separation began. She had known about the policy. Her boyfriend Troy had known about it too. The two of them had been together for almost a year, the detective said. Long enough to plan. Long enough to decide that the fastest way to $250,000 was through a storage unit and a tarp. What they hadn't planned for was a 7-year-old boy in a closet with a flashlight and a plastic dinosaur, waiting for someone to find him, and a grandfather who drove 4 hours on a bad knee because 2 missed phone calls was enough. Troy was arrested first. He'd made the mistake of using his real phone to search storage unit rental options, and cell tower data put him at the location the night of Kevin's death. He tried to claim he knew nothing, that Nadine had acted alone, that he was just a guy who made some bad choices in a bad relationship. The detectives had seen that performance before. Nadine was arrested 4 days later at a motel 2 states over. She had taken her car and a bag of cash and seemed to have believed, somehow, that the plan had worked cleanly, that there was nothing tying her to it, that she could wait a few months, file for the insurance money, and walk away. I don't understand that kind of thinking. I've tried. I've spent a lot of sleepless nights trying to understand how a person gets to a place where this is something they're capable of. I don't think I'll ever get there. Maybe that's not a failure of my imagination. Maybe that's just what it means to be someone who isn't capable of it. Both of them were charged with first-degree murder and felony child endangerment. The trial was 7 months later. I was there every day. I sat in a third row behind the prosecutor's table, and I watched. I watched Troy try to minimize his role, and watched the jury watch him do it. I watched Nadine sit at the defense table with a stillness that I can only describe as practiced, like she'd decided in advance what expression to wear and was committed to it. The evidence was thorough. The cell data, the storage unit records, the fake ID, text messages between Nadine and Troy from 3 months before Kevin died, discussing the insurance policy, discussing timelines, discussing what they'd do with the money. The prosecutor read portions of those messages aloud in the courtroom, and I heard people behind me go quiet in that particular way. Not stunned silence, but something heavier. The silence of people confronting something they hadn't fully believed was real until that moment. Caleb did not testify. He was 7 years old and had been through enough. A forensic child specialist spoke on his behalf, presenting his account in careful, clinical language that still managed to be devastating. The jury was out for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Nadine received life without the possibility of parole. Troy received the same. The judge addressed the courtroom briefly before sentencing, something I'm told judges don't always do, and he said that what had been done to Kevin was a calculated act of pure greed, and what had been done to Caleb was something he would be carrying for the rest of his life. He said the law existed for moments exactly like this one. I held it together until I got to the parking lot. Then I sat on a bench near the entrance, and I let myself fall apart for a few minutes. Just a few. An older man in a suit walked past and glanced at me and kept walking, and I appreciated that. I didn't want anyone to say anything. I just needed those few minutes. Then I pulled myself back together, the way you do, the way you have to, because there was a little boy waiting for me at home. Caleb lives with me now. It wasn't a complicated legal process, all things considered. With both parents out of the picture, one gone, one convicted, I was the obvious choice, and I was ready. I'd already started clearing out my office to make room for his things before the trial was even over. He's been in therapy since that first week. A woman named Dr. Patterson, who has an office full of sand trays and stuffed animals, and who has, over the past several months, somehow managed to help a 7-year-old boy begin to process something that most adults couldn't handle. I don't know exactly what they talk about. That's between them. What I know is that Caleb started sleeping through the night again around month 3, that he started laughing more around month 4, that he still sleeps with a little plastic triceratops on his nightstand. There are hard days, days when he asks me questions I don't have good answers to. He knows his mother did something very wrong and that she's in prison. He knows his father isn't coming back. He's 7 years old and he carries those facts around with him, and I watch him carry them, and I think about how heavy they must be. But he's strong. Stronger than I was at his age. Stronger, maybe, than I am now. He started 2nd grade in September. He has 2 friends, Owen and Marcus, a different Marcus, small world, and most afternoons I can hear them in the backyard getting into the particular kind of trouble that involves sticks and elaborate rules and arguments about whether dinosaurs could beat robots in a fight. He's growing. He's healing. I planted a garden in the spring. Kevin always said I had a gift for tomatoes, which he did not inherit and was slightly embarrassed about. I let Caleb help me this year. He's not great at it either, honestly, but he has strong opinions about where things should go, and I found it's worth more to let him feel ownership over something living and growing than to have the tomatoes perfectly spaced. Kevin would have loved watching that. His son, elbow deep in garden soil, telling his old grandpa where the peppers should go. I miss him every day. Every single day. He was a good man. Reliable, like his mother used to say. Patient with his kid. Trying to do right by everyone, even when everything was falling apart around him. He deserved decades more. He deserved to watch Caleb grow up and become whatever a paleontologist/firefighter actually turns into. I can't give him that. But I can give Caleb what Kevin wanted for him, which was safety and love and someone who shows up. I show up. That's the whole job now. Some mornings that feels like a weight I don't know how I'll carry. Most mornings it feels like the only thing I've ever been sure of. I call his teacher every other week to check in. I go to every school event with a folding chair and a bad knee, and I sit in the front row. Tuesday evenings, when Caleb is in the bath, I sometimes sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and have a quiet minute with Kevin. Tell him how his son is doing. Tell him what funny thing Caleb said that week. Tell him I'm keeping my promise. That's still our Tuesday thing. Some things you just keep. I've thought a lot about what it means to act on instinct versus acting on reason. Most of my life I tried to lead with reason. Don't overreact. Don't embarrass your adult children. Give people space. And most of the time that served me well. But reason told me Kevin was busy. Reason told me one missed Tuesday wasn't an emergency. Reason told me a police officer knocking on a door once was probably enough. Instinct told me to get in the truck. I'm not saying instinct is always right. What I'm saying is that the people who love us deserve the version of us that listens to both. The version that thinks things through and still shows up when something feels wrong, even if we can't fully explain why. Nadine and Troy made a series of choices. Small ones at first, I imagine. A conversation about money. A look at a policy document. Then bigger ones, each choice making the next one easier, until they had crossed so far into a place I can't follow that they were capable of leaving a 7-year-old boy alone in a dark closet with crackers and a dying flashlight. I don't think either of them woke up one day and decided to become the kind of person who does that. I think they got there gradually, one compromise at a time, and by the end, there was no version of themselves left that could stop it. That's the thing about character. It isn't tested in the dramatic moments. It's built or destroyed in the small ones. In whether you're honest when it's inconvenient, whether you're kind when no one's watching, whether you hold on to your sense of what's right even when the wrong thing starts to seem easier. Kevin was a good man, reliable. That word still gets me. He showed up. For his job, for his son, for his Tuesday calls with his father. He wasn't perfect, nobody is, but he was trying, genuinely trying, in the quiet, unglamorous way that most decent people try. And the tragedy is that his decency didn't protect him from what happened to him. But here's what I've come to believe. It does protect Caleb, because Caleb knew his grandfather would come. A 7-year-old boy, alone in the dark for days, held on to that. Not as a wish, as a certainty. He told me he knew I'd come, and he meant it. That kind of trust doesn't appear out of nowhere. It gets built, slowly, through years of someone being exactly who they said they'd be. Kevin built it. I'd like to think I helped build it too. What Caleb carries now is heavy. I won't pretend otherwise, but he also carries something else. The knowledge that love shows up. That the people who mean it don't wait for a perfect time or a clear explanation. They get in the truck. I'm 63 years old. My knee hurts most mornings. I didn't plan on raising another child at this point in my life, but I look at that boy eating cereal at my kitchen table, arguing with me about where the peppers should go in the garden, sleeping through the night again. And I understand that some things aren't about what you planned. Some things are just about whether you show up. I showed up, that's all I did, and it turned out to be everything.